I remember the exact moment I stopped explaining myself. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. No doors slammed. No voices raised. It happened quietly, the way most important things in a woman's life do. I was standing in the kitchen, holding a cup of tea that had gone cold, listening to my own voice justify something that didn't need defending. And suddenly, I felt tired. Not the kind of tired sleep fixes. The kind that comes from years of being misunderstood on purpose. For decades I explained everything. Why I was late. Why I was quiet. Why I didn't laugh at certain jokes. Why I needed rest. Why I felt hurt. I explained my feelings like they were court evidence, hoping someone would finally rule in my favor. But every explanation only invited more questions. More doubt. More control. That morning something shifted. I heard myself speaking and it sounded small, careful, apologetic. And I realized something terrifying. They weren't listening to understand. They were listening to respond, to correct, to reshape me into something easier to manage. So I stopped mid-sentence. No one noticed at first. People rarely do when a woman goes silent. They assume she'll continue. They assume silence is temporary. That she'll come back with better words, softer tone, clearer reasons. I simply nodded. I sipped my cold tea. And I said nothing else. Inside me something unclenched. The pressure to perform clarity vanished. For the first time in years my thoughts belonged only to me. I didn't owe them packaging. I didn't owe them comfort. They thought it was a phase. They always do. The silence felt strange at first, like wearing clothes that didn't quite fit. I had spent my life filling gaps, smoothing tension, translating my emotions into something digestible. Now the gaps remained open. Awkward, heavy, uncomfortable. And people hate discomfort. By afternoon the questions started. Are you okay? They asked, not with concern but suspicion. I smiled. A gentle, harmless smile. The kind that gives nothing away. I'm fine, I said. 2 words. No explanation attached. That's when I noticed it, the shift in the room. Conversations stumbled. The usual rhythm was off. They were used to my commentary, my emotional labor, my reassurance. Without it, they felt exposed. Unbalanced. They tried again later. Different tone. Softer voice. Did I do something wrong? I paused. Looked at them. And answered honestly. I don't feel like explaining. Silence followed. Thick. Startling. You see, explanations had been my currency. Without them they felt poor. Powerless. They didn't know how to interact with a woman who wasn't offering context for her existence. That night I slept deeply. No rehearsed conversations. No mental rewrites. Just rest. I didn't know then, but my silence had already started a quiet panic. Because when a woman stops explaining herself, it means she has stopped asking for permission. And that terrifies people who were comfortable controlling the narrative. The next morning the house felt different. Not louder. Not quieter. Just alert. Like everyone was waiting for something to happen, and that something was me. I could feel it in the way eyes followed me without looking directly. In the way conversations paused when I entered a room, then resumed with forced normalcy once I sat down. I went about my routine calmly. Made breakfast. Folded laundry. Watered the plants near the window. Ordinary things. But the absence of my usual explanations made every ordinary action feel suspicious to them. Normally, I would narrate my intentions without realizing it. I'm making tea because my head hurts. I'm opening the window because the room feels heavy. I'm quiet because I didn't sleep well. That day I said none of it. At breakfast someone finally broke. You're being very quiet, they said, halfway between observation and accusation. I looked up slowly. Took a breath. Yes, I replied. Just that. The word hung in the air. Unfinished. They waited for more, like a sentence missing its ending. But I went back to eating. Chewed slowly. Peacefully. You could almost hear the panic forming behind their eyes. Silence makes people confront themselves. Without my explanations to blame or dissect, they had nothing to push against. Later I overheard whispers. My name spoken softly, urgently. Questions passed around like secrets. Is she upset? Did something happen? How long is this going to last? I didn't interrupt. I didn't clarify. For the first time, I allowed myself to be misunderstood without correcting it. There is a strange power in that. By afternoon, the tone changed. Less curiosity, more concern. Concern dressed up as care. Someone brought me tea I hadn't asked for. Another checked in with exaggerated sweetness. Their kindness felt transactional, like bait. "Talk to us," they said gently. "We're worried." I met their eyes. Not coldly, not warmly, just honestly. "I'm not ready to talk." That was when fear crept in. That evening, the tension sharpened. Politeness gave way to frustration. You see, people tolerate silence only when they believe they can eventually break it. When they sense they can't, they grow desperate. I was sitting alone when someone approached me, voice firmer now. "This isn't healthy," they said. "You can't just shut people out." I almost smiled. For years, I had been told I talked too much about my feelings. Now suddenly my silence was a problem. "I'm not shutting anyone out," I replied calmly. "I'm just not explaining myself." They didn't like that answer. Didn't give them a role. No villain to fight. No emotion to manage. Just a boundary they hadn't approved. Their voice rose. "That's not how families work. Families, workplaces, friendships, they all run on the same unspoken rule. Someone must always be available to absorb confusion, smooth conflict, and make others comfortable." I had been that someone for a very long time. "I understand," I said softly. And I meant it. That scared them more. Because understanding without compliance is dangerous. Later that night, I heard doors close harder than necessary. Footsteps pacing. A phone call whispered behind a wall. My silence had turned the house into a courtroom where no one knew the charges, but everyone felt guilty. And me? I felt lighter. Not happy. Not triumphant. Just free in a way I had forgotten was possible. I realized something then, something I wish I had learned earlier in life. People don't fear silence itself. They fear what silence says about their control. When I explained myself, they felt secure. When I stopped, they felt exposed. As I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I knew this was only the beginning. Silence is never just silence. It's a message. And once sent, it cannot be unsent. Tomorrow they would try harder. Different tactics. Guilt. Authority. Maybe even anger. But I had already crossed the hardest line. The one inside myself. And on the other side of. By the third day, silence had stopped being confusing and started being threatening. I could feel it in the air like humidity before a storm. No one asked if I was okay anymore. That softness had expired. Now they watched me carefully, as if my quiet carried a hidden agenda. I noticed the change in their body language. Folded arms. Tight smiles. Conversations that ended abruptly when I walked in. My silence had become a mirror, and no one liked what they were seeing reflected back. At lunch, someone finally snapped. "You're doing this on purpose," they said. Not a question. An accusation. I didn't rush to respond. I took my time. Silence, when chosen, should never be hurried. "Doing what?" I asked calmly. "This." They waved their hand vaguely. "This distance. This attitude." I nodded slowly, as if considering their words. "I don't feel distant," I said. "I just feel quiet." That was the moment frustration tipped into anger. Because anger is what people reach for when control slips through their fingers. They leaned forward. "You think you're better than us now?" There it was. The real fear. Not that I was hurt. Not that something was wrong. But that I had changed the hierarchy. That I had stepped out of the role they understood. I remembered how often I had explained myself in the past to prevent moments like this. How I softened my tone, added context, apologized for emotions I didn't cause. All of it had been an attempt to keep the peace. But peace built on self-erasure is just delayed conflict. "I don't think I'm better," I said evenly. "I just don't think I need to explain myself anymore." The room went quiet in a way that felt final. Not awkward. Not confused. Final. They stared at me like I had spoken a foreign language. A dangerous one. Because a woman who stops translating herself is no longer easy to manage. Later, alone in my room, I felt a flicker of doubt. Silence demands courage. It doesn't comfort you the way words do. Doesn't reassure. That night, the pressure came from a different angle. Not confrontation, nostalgia. Someone sat beside me and laughed softly. "You've changed," they said almost fondly. "You used to tell me everything." I turned my head and looked at them. "I used to feel safe doing that," I replied. The smile faded. Because nostalgia is only comforting when it doesn't expose responsibility. They sighed. Heavy and theatrical. "I miss the old you." I thought about that sentence for a long time after they left. The old me. The woman who explained, justified, softened, absorbed. The woman who carried emotional weight so others didn't have to. People don't miss you. They miss the access they had to you. Later, guilt arrived, quietly like a thief. I wondered if I was being unfair. If silence was cruel. If maybe I owed them clarity after all these years. Then I remembered how often clarity had been used against me. How my honesty became ammunition. How my explanations were dissected, dismissed, or used to control the narrative. Silence wasn't cruelty. It was protection. The next morning, the dynamic had shifted again. They were careful now. Measured. Testing boundaries like a hand near a flame. No one raised their voice. No one pushed too hard. Because they had learned something important. I was not bluffing. There is a moment in every power shift when people realize the old rules no longer apply. That moment is always quiet. Always tense. Always irreversible. I felt it then. They no longer tried to understand me. They tried to predict me. And that is when I knew my silence had fully landed. Not as punishment. Not as rebellion. But as a line. A line that said, "I am no longer available to be misunderstood on demand." By the fourth day, the house had reorganized itself around my silence. Not physically, emotionally. People adjusted their tone, their timing, their expectations. Where I used to be the center of emotional gravity, I had become an unknown variable. And unknowns make people nervous. I noticed how plans were made without consulting me, then casually mentioned afterward, as if my presence was optional. Before I would have questioned it. Explained why I felt left out. Smiled through the sting so no one felt uncomfortable. This time I said nothing. They watched my face closely when they told me. Waiting for reaction. Waiting for hurt. When none came, something flickered behind their eyes. Confusion. At dinner, the conversation stayed shallow. Weather. Work. Someone else's problem. No one asked my opinion. No one invited my emotional labor. It was like they were afraid to open a door they couldn't close again. I ate slowly, listening more than speaking. There is clarity in observation when you are no longer busy defending yourself. That's when I realized how much of my value to them had been conversational. I wasn't missed as a person. I was missed as a function. Later that evening, someone tried a new approach. Humor. "Careful," they joked lightly. "If you stay this quiet, people might forget you're here." I looked up, met their eyes, and smiled. "That's okay," I said. The joke died immediately. Because people use humor to test boundaries. My answer had confirmed one they weren't ready for. Being forgotten had always been my fear. I had spoken to stay visible. Explained to stay included. But now the idea no longer frightened me. In fact, it felt like relief. Silence had stripped things down to their truth. Those who valued me beyond my explanations remained steady. Those who didn't grew restless. Before bed, I stood by the window and watched the lights outside. I felt a strange mix of grief and strength. Grief for the years I had spent performing emoji. The attempt came the next morning, dressed as concern but rooted in authority. Someone sat me down, voice calm, practiced. "We need to talk about what's going on with you." I almost laughed at the phrasing. "With you." As if silence were a malfunction. "I don't feel like there's a problem," I said. They leaned back, clearly annoyed. "This distance isn't healthy. We can't fix what you won't explain." There it was again, the assumption that I needed fixing. "I'm not asking to be fixed," I replied gently. "I'm just asking to be left alone." That sentence shifted the energy in the room. Authority doesn't like being declined politely. Their tone hardened. "You're being difficult." I nodded. I used to be accommodating. The silence that followed was thick with realization. They were starting to understand the cost of losing access to me. They tried guilt next. Reminded me of sacrifices made. Of everything they had done for me. A familiar script. One that had always worked before. I listened. I didn't interrupt. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. When they finished, I said quietly, "I hear you. Not I understand. Not I agree. Just I hear you." It was enough to end the conversation. That afternoon the atmosphere shifted again, colder now. Controlled. Silence had changed from something they wanted to break into something they wanted to punish. And still I remained calm. Because once you stop explaining yourself, you see very clearly who benefited from your confusion. And who resents your clarity. As I lay down that night, I felt something settle inside me. Not defiance, not anger, but resolve. Tomorrow the stakes would rise. They always do when control is truly threatened. By the 5th day, the kindness disappeared completely. What remained was strategy. Silence, I had learned, forces people to reveal how they operate when charm fails. No one asked how I slept. No one offered tea. The air was clipped, efficient. Conversations were short and transactional, as if warmth itself had been revoked. I watched it happen without flinching. That morning a decision was made without me. An important one. I found out the same way strangers do. Halfway through a conversation that assumed my agreement. Before I would have jumped in. Explained why it mattered to me. Why I should have been included. I would have softened my disappointment so no one felt accused. This time I simply nodded. That confused them more than anger ever could. Later someone confronted me. "You don't seem to care anymore." I considered the statement carefully. "I care," I said. "I just don't chase." The words slipped out easily, like they had been waiting years to be spoken. They stared at me, searching for sarcasm, for bitterness. Finding none unsettled them. Because when someone stops chasing, the power dynamic collapses. There is no game without pursuit. By afternoon, the narrative had shifted again. Now I was cold, distant, unrecognizable. Labels placed on me to make my silence sound like a flaw instead of a choice. I overheard my name used in warnings. "Don't ask her. She won't say anything anyway." I didn't correct them. Letting people misunderstand you is expensive at first. Then it becomes affordable. Then it becomes freeing. In the quiet moments alone with my thoughts, I noticed something else. I was no longer anxious. No tightness in my chest. No rehearsed conversations. No need to predict reactions. Silence had given me back my nervous system. That evening as I passed through the room, someone muttered, "Must be nice, not caring about anyone but yourself." I stopped. Turned slowly. "It is nice," I said calmly. "You should try it sometime." That night, the house felt colder, though the temperature hadn't changed. I sensed a decision being made somewhere beyond my hearing. Silence invites planning. The next morning confirmed it. I was called in, not asked. The tone was firm, rehearsed. "Since you won't communicate," they said, "we're going to move forward without considering your feelings." I nodded. That's already been happening. They didn't expect that. Control depends on denial. I had just removed it. Their voice rose. "You're tearing this family apart." I thought about all the times I had stitched things together with my words, my patience, my explanations. All the invisible repairs no one noticed. "I'm not tearing anything apart," I replied. "I just stopped holding it together alone." Silence followed. Heavy. Exposed. That's when anger finally surfaced, raw and unmasked. Accusations flew. Selfish. Ungrateful. Dramatic. Words designed to wound me into compliance. They didn't work. Not because I was strong, but because I was done. Later, alone in my room, I felt the aftermath settle in. My hands shook slightly. Courage always comes with a cost. But beneath the shaking was something solid. Certainty. People who only respect you when you are explaining yourself never respected you at all. By now my silence had stopped being a mystery. It was a message they understood very clearly. I was no longer participating in a system that required my self-erasure to function. And systems like that don't collapse quietly. They retaliate. Tomorrow the silence would be tested harder than ever. By the 6th day, retaliation arrived wearing a calm face. Not loud. Not explosive. Controlled. That's how you know it's intentional. The atmosphere had shifted again. Colder but precise. No more arguments. No accusations. Just quiet decisions being made around me like chess moves I wasn't meant to notice. I did notice. Schedules changed without mention. Doors closed where they used to stay open. Information was withheld, then revealed casually, as if forgetting me was an accident instead of a tactic. Before I would have asked questions, clarified timelines, explained why being informed mattered to me. I would have tried to reinsert myself gently, politely. Now I observed. There is power in watching people scramble to regain control when you stop cooperating. That afternoon someone tested me directly. If you don't talk, we can't trust you. I met their gaze. You trusted me when I talked, I said. You just didn't respect me. The words landed harder than any shout. They laughed nervously, brushing it off. But I saw it, the recognition. Because truth doesn't need volume. Later, something important was taken from me. Not physically. Symbolically. A responsibility I had carried for years was reassigned without discussion. It was meant to hurt. I felt the sting, yes. But also relief. I hadn't realized how heavy that responsibility had been until it was gone. They waited for my reaction. I gave them none. That's when the punishment escalated. They stopped acknowledging my presence altogether. No greetings. No eye contact. Silence used as a weapon now, not a choice. Ironically, it felt familiar. I had lived inside this kind of silence before. The kind where you exist only as long as you're useful. But this time it didn't shrink me. Because my silence was rooted in self-respect, not fear. That night I sat alone, listening to the house breathe around me. I thought about all the women who had been labeled difficult when they simply stopped X. The breaking point came quietly. Someone left a message for me. Not spoken, not written. A decision finalized without my input, delivered as a fact. No room for response. It was a line drawn. I read it once. Then again. I felt the old instinct rise, the urge to clarify, to defend, to fix. Years of conditioning don't vanish overnight. I sat with the feeling until it passed. Then I did something new. Nothing. No reaction. No confrontation. No explanation. That unnerved them more than anger ever could. Because retaliation only works when the other person still needs your approval. I no longer did. By evening, tension thickened. Voices were low. Doors shut harder. My silence had become a presence, filling spaces where compliance used to live. Someone finally cracked. Say something, they demanded. Anything. I looked at them calmly. Why? They opened their mouth, closed it again. There was no answer that didn't expose them. Silence had cornered the truth. I realized then that this wasn't just about me. My refusal to explain had disrupted a pattern that relied on someone always absorbing discomfort. When I stepped out, the system destabilized. And systems don't forgive disruption. They exile it. I felt the shift before it was spoken. Distance solidifying into separation. Not yet physical, emotional. The kind that prepares the ground. I went to bed that night knowing something irreversible had happened. Not because they had pushed me out, but because I had stopped trying to stay. And when a woman stops trying to stay where she is not respected, the ending is no longer tragic. It's inevitable.
By the 7th day, exile was no longer subtle. It had taken shape. The silence around me wasn't accidental anymore. It was organized. No one waited for me. Meals happened without notice. Conversations flowed as if I weren't sitting a few feet away. My presence had been edited out, cleanly and deliberately. And yet, I had never felt more present in my own body. I noticed how calm I was, how steady my hands felt, how my breathing no longer adjusted itself to other people's moods. That alone told me everything I needed to know about the cost of my former role. That morning, I overheard a sentence meant for me to hear. She thinks she can just detach and still belong. Belong. The word echoed long after the speaker walked away. Belonging, I realized, had always come with conditions. Speak when spoken to, explain when questioned, soften when hurt, stay pleasant, stay available. I had broken every condition without raising my voice. Someone approached me later, not with anger this time, but calculation. If this continues, they said carefully, things will change. I nodded. They already have. That unsettled them, because threats lose power when the outcome is no longer feared. They leaned closer. "You're going to regret this." I looked at them for a long moment before replying. I already regret how long I stayed quiet when I shouldn't have. For the first time, they had nothing to say. By afternoon, the story had spread. Not what actually happened, but a version that made my silence look irrational. I was unstable, withdrawn, difficult. Labels handed out generously so no one had to ask why I had changed. I didn't correct the story. Let people talk. Silence survives gossip better than truth survives manipulation. As evening fell, I packed a small bag. Not dramatically, not as a statement, just practically. Essentials only. I didn't know yet if I would leave tomorrow or next week, but I knew this. Staying no longer felt necessary for survival, and that realization is always the beginning of the end. That night, someone knocked on my door. Softly, cautiously. A final attempt, I suspected. When I opened it, their face held something close to panic. "This isn't how it was supposed to go," they said. I waited. "You were supposed to explain," they continued. "We thought you'd come back to normal." Normal. The word landed heavy. "I am normal," I said quietly. "I'm just no longer convenient." Their eyes searched mine, looking for hesitation, guilt, a crack they could slip through. They found none. They exhaled sharply. "You're really going to throw everything away over silence?" I shook my head. "No, I stopped throwing myself away." That was the moment the negotiation ended. They straightened, masks sliding back into place. "Then don't expect things to stay the same." "I don't," I replied, and I meant it. When the door closed, I sat on the edge of my bed and felt the weight lift. Not all at once, freedom never does, but enough to breathe. I realized then that exile is only punishment when you believe you deserve inclusion at any cost. I didn't anymore. The house slept uneasily that night. I could feel it, the tension of a system adjusting to the absence of compliance. Tomorrow, lines would harden, decisions would be finalized. But inside me, something was already settled. I no longer needed to win. I no longer needed to be understood. I no longer needed to stay. Silence had done its work. It had shown me the truth, not about them, but about myself. And once you see that clearly, there is no going back.
The morning I left didn't feel dramatic. No storm, no confrontation, just a quiet certainty that had settled into my bones overnight. I woke before anyone else. The house was still, unaware that its balance was about to shift. I moved through the rooms slowly, not out of nostalgia, but awareness. Every step felt deliberate, grounded. I packed only what mattered, not memories, not symbols, just what I needed to move forward. The rest could stay where it belonged, in a life that no longer fit me. As I zipped the bag, I paused. For years, this moment would have terrified me, leaving without explaining, without closure conversations, without carefully managing everyone's feelings. Now it felt clean. I stepped into the hallway and noticed the quiet, not the hostile silence of the past few days, but something softer, empty, like a space waiting to be filled with something new. Someone noticed me at the door. Their eyes widened slightly. "You're leaving?" I nodded. Yes. No speech, no justification. They opened their mouth, ready to pull me back into the old pattern. I could see the script forming, concern mixed with blame. "I don't have time to talk," I said gently. "Take care." And then I walked out. The door closed behind me with a sound that was final, but not cruel, just finished. Outside, the air felt different, sharper, honest. I stood there for a moment, bag in hand, letting the reality sink in. I hadn't been thrown out. I had chosen myself. That distinction mattered more than anything. As I walked away, my phone buzzed once, then again. Messages I didn't read, explanations they wanted, reactions they expected. I kept walking. For the first time, silence wasn't a tool or a boundary. It was freedom. The first day alone was strange, not lonely, unfamiliar. When you've spent years reacting to others, stillness feels loud at first. I sat in a small, quiet space that was mine alone and listened to my thoughts without interruption. No one needed reassurance. No one needed emotional translation. The calm felt almost suspicious. Then relief arrived, not in waves, in breath. I noticed how deeply I could inhale, how my shoulders dropped without effort, how my mind no longer ran simulations of conversations that might never happen. Silence had followed me, but this time it was gentle. By evening, guilt tried one last time to take hold. Old voices echoed in my head. You should have explained. You should have stayed. You should have tried harder. I let the thoughts pass without answering them. Explanation had never saved me before. It wasn't going to start now. I made tea and sat by the window as night settled in. The world moved on without commentary, without permission, and that felt right. I checked my phone once. Missed calls, long messages. I read none of them. Not out of anger, out of completion. I realized then that silence isn't the absence of voice, it's the presence of choice. I had chosen peace over performance, clarity over chaos, self-respect over belonging, and nothing had collapsed. The sky didn't fall, the world didn't end, only a chapter did. As I turned off the light and lay down to sleep, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Safety. Not because someone else provided it, but because I finally did. It didn't take long for the aftermath to begin. Silence leaves an echo, and they were finally hearing it. The first reaction was disbelief. Messages shifted in tone, from confused to irritated to pleading. The absence of my explanations created a vacuum they didn't know how to fill. They were used to my presence stabilizing things, absorbing tension, translating emotions. Without me, everything felt louder. I imagined the house without my voice, conversations sharper, misunderstandings unresolved, emotions ricocheting with nowhere to land. Systems only realize their dependence when the pillar is removed. By the second day, the narrative changed again. Now I was ungrateful, dramatic, running away. It was easier to rewrite the story than confront the truth. I heard it through a mutual contact. She just left without saying anything. Without saying anything. The irony almost made me smile. I had said everything, just not in the language they wanted. I resisted the urge to correct the story. Silence had taught me that clarification only feeds distortion when people are committed to misunderstanding. Instead, I focused on my own days, simple routines, morning light, quiet meals, space to think without bracing myself. That's when something unexpected happened. I started to miss myself, the woman I had buried under explanations, the one who had opinions she never voiced because they caused discomfort, the one who felt deeply but learned to translate feelings into palatable pieces. She was returning, slowly, cautiously. By midweek, the calls stopped, replaced by a cold, brittle quiet. That told me everything I needed to know. They weren't worried about me. They were adjusting to life without my labor, and adjustment always comes after resistance.
Then came the message that mattered. It was short, direct, unapologetic. A statement, not a question. We need to talk. This has gone far enough. I stared at the screen for a long time, not because I was tempted, but because I recognized the tone, authority, finality, the expectation that I would comply. Once, that tone would have pulled me back immediately, triggered explanations, apologies, urgency. Now it felt distant, almost unfamiliar. I typed nothing. Silence, I had learned, is not avoidance when you've already said your truth. It's alignment. A day passed, then another. The message remained unread, and with each hour, something settled deeper inside me, a certainty that I had not made a mistake. I thought about what would happen if I responded, how quickly the conversation would pivot back to their comfort, how my boundaries would be debated instead of respected. I didn't need closure from people who only felt comfortable when I was confused. That evening, I ran into someone unexpectedly. They looked surprised, then curious. "You seem different," they said. I smiled. "I am." There was no bitterness in it, no defense, just fact. They nodded slowly, as if seeing something clearly for the first time, and in that moment I understood something important. Growth always looks like abandonment to those who benefited from your silence. I went home that night and slept deeply, not the exhausted sleep of survival, but the steady rest of someone who is no longer negotiating her worth. Tomorrow would be the last test. Not from them, from me. The final test didn't arrive with noise. It came quietly, the way real decisions always do. I woke up that morning with a familiar reflex, the urge to check my phone, to brace myself for someone else's expectations. My hand hovered for a second. Then I stopped. That pause told me everything. For the first time in my life, my day did not begin with preparation for someone else's emotions. No damage control, no rehearsed explanations, no apology waiting to be delivered. Just me. I made breakfast slowly, sat by the window, watched the city move without asking me to justify my place in it. The world didn't demand clarity. It simply existed. That's when it hit me. The real power of silence was never about them noticing it. It was about me noticing myself. I thought back to the woman I used to be, the one who believed love required constant translation, that safety came from being understood, that belonging had to be earned through emotional availability. She wasn't weak. She was trained to believe that peace meant compliance, that discomfort was her responsibility to fix, that explaining herself was the price of being allowed to stay. No one had forced her into that role, but everyone had benefited from it. I felt no anger toward her now, only gratitude. She had survived long enough for me to become this version, the one who knew when to stop. The phone buzzed once more. A final attempt, perhaps. I didn't look, because I no longer needed to prove that my silence was intentional. It already was. I realized something profound then. When you stop explaining yourself, life doesn't get louder, it gets clearer, and clarity doesn't argue. By evening, the question answered itself, not through confrontation, but peace. I took a walk as the sun dipped low, the light soft and forgiving. People passed me, strangers living full lives without needing my story. It felt grounding, humbling. I belonged here without explanation. That was the truth I had been searching for all along. I understood now why my silence had frightened them so much. It wasn't rejection, it was independence. And independence feels like abandonment to those who relied on your availability. But independence is not cruelty, it's honesty. I stopped at a quiet corner and sat for a moment, letting the day settle. I felt something solid inside me, not armor, not walls. Boundaries, the kind that don't need defending. I knew they might never understand my silence. They might tell the story forever in a way that made them comfortable. And for the first time, that didn't bother me. Because healing doesn't require agreement. It requires alignment. I went home and turned off the lights early. As I lay down, I thought about all the women who would hear this story and recognize themselves in it. Women who are tired of explaining their pain to people committed to misunderstanding it. This is what I would tell them. Silence is not your failure. It is your graduation. When you stop explaining yourself, you don't disappear. You arrive. And the people who truly see you will never need a translation. I closed my eyes with a calm I had earned, not borrowed. The story didn't end with reconciliation. It ended with self-respect. And that was enough.